Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective, as we deconstruct making the case for Trump as the right choice. Now, before we continue, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments. So welcome. This is part 6 of our deconstructing Apostle Alton Williams, making his case for why black people should vote for Trump. Now, of course, as I said before, these are not his words, but this is without a doubt his position. And so we are deconstructing the argument, excuse me, that Apostle Williams make. Now, he is no doubt a black conservative and has been one, it seems, for a while, for decades. Now, the fact that he's a black conservative in and of itself is not the problem. What has been manifested of late is the idea that the Christian right or Christian nationalists, black Republicans, that the Republican ideology, the conservative ideology that they push, from a Christian perspective, they call it a biblical worldview, supporting and voting for people who share a biblical worldview. What I've been deconstructing is that this is not a biblical worldview. It is a political worldview, plain and simple. And you just use certain aspects of the Bible to justify your position. And in order to do that, you have to, one, twist the scriptures. I'm going to demonstrate that in a moment. And then you also have to ignore the party that you're supporting. The people in the party, you have to ignore all of their sins and then say God is okay with their sins. God is okay with ignoring their sins for the greater good. In other words, all the adultery, all the homosexuality, all the abortions that the Republicans do, we can ignore that because, well, they share our worldview, whatever the heck that is. While at the same time demonizing, condemning to hell, and God's wrath, the Democrats. That's the hypocrisy here. So let's jump back in it because, again, I want to, as I said, share something. Excuse me. Now, I left off last time, I cut it off that he began to get into Leviticus here, chapter 18. And I said last time that I'm going to go a lot further than what he is doing. But here's the problem with his take on Leviticus 18. I'm going to go to the scripture. I see my picture here is hiding the verses that he is reading here. So what I want to do is just that. And I left off saying this. I asked the question, why did he chime in here at verse 20? Okay, why did he chime in at verse 20? And the reason why he's doing this is because if you listen to him, you have to conclude that this is the worst thing. In other words, this is what God is really concerned about. Let's ignore the entire chapter. So let's do this. I said I wanted to go, and I wanted to actually go back, and I want to read. I'm going to do it quickly, but I want to read the sins here that Moses speaks about. And so I want to read it. I'm going to go back because I want to show you why it's problematic how he is approaching this. Look at chapter 18, verse 1 says, Yahweh spoke to Moses. Let me see here. Okay, I want to make sure I had the right translation. I'm using the Holman Christian Standard Translation, so the read is going to be a little different if you're using a New King James or other translation. Listen what he says right here. He says, now Yahweh spoke to Moses, speak to the Israelites and tell them, I am Yahweh your God. Now the first thing is we need to understand that God is speaking to Israel as a nation. And the only nation where this would really apply to would be Israel, because God created the nation of Israel from the seed of Abraham. And so this is really the only nation that can be called a theocracy, where God rules. Excuse me. God rules, and God revealed himself to his people by signs and wonders. He gave him his laws and his statutes supernaturally. So Israel is the only nation. And what Republicans and Christian right and Christian conservatives, right, they try to make America on equal footing as Israel. And you're going to hear some of the things he's saying there, that, that God is going to judge the nation, right, America, for its sins. I'll get more into that. And in terms of, if you're talking about these statutes, now, so he says right here, do not follow the practice of the land of Egypt where you used to live, or follow the practice of the land of Canaan where I'm bringing you. You must not follow their customs. You are to practice my ordinance, and you are to keep my statutes by following them. I am Yahweh, your God. To keep my statutes and ordinance, a person will live if he does them. I am Yahweh. Now listen to this. You are not to come near any close relative for sexual intercourse. I am Yahweh. You are not to shame your father by having sex with your mother. She is your mother. You must not have sexual intercourse with her. You are not to have sex with your father's wife. It is a shame. It will shame your father. You are not to have sexual intercourse with your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's, whether born at home or born elsewhere. You're not to have sex with her. You're not to have sexual intercourse with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, because it will shame your family. You're not to have sexual intercourse with your father's wife, daughter, who is adopted by your father. She is your sister. You are not to have sexual intercourse with your father's sister. She is your father's close relative. Some of your translation will say aunt. You are not to have sexual intercourse with your mother's sister, for she is your mother's close relative. You are not to shame your father's brother by coming near his wife to have sexual intercourse. She is your aunt. You are not to have sexual intercourse with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You are not to have sex with her. You are not to have sexual intercourse with your brother's wife. It will shame your brother. You are not to have sexual intercourse with a woman and her daughter. You're not to marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter and have sex with her. They are close relative. It is depraved, right? So notice the language God is using. You're not to marry a woman as a rival to her sister and have sexual intercourse with her during her sister's lifetime. You're not to come near a woman during her menstrual impurity to have sexual intercourse with her. You're not to have sexual intercourse with your neighbor's wife, defiling yourself with her. So stop. So he picks up with verse 20, and he just reads over. Now he doesn't highlight it, but now just keep in mind all of these sins, that so far there is no difference. In other words, God doesn't stop at verse 20 and go, now I'm going to highlight these sins. Okay, now these are the other sins. Okay, they're sins, but this one, now as I move forward, God's really, really, really going to get pissed at this one. Verse 21, you're not to make any of your children pass through the fire to Moloch. Do not profane the name of your God. I am Yahweh. You are not to sleep with a man as with a woman, this is detestable. So this right here is where he really chimed in on, because this is the Republican talking point. And to them, this is, in other words, when God was writing this with Moses, and he had the fire, right, the finger of God, he also probably used another finger and highlighted this part. Of course, I'm being hilarious with this. He says, you're not to have sexual intercourse with any animal, defiling yourself with it. A woman is not to present herself to an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves by any of these practices, for the nations I'm driving out before you have defiled themselves by all these things. The land has become defiled, so I am punishing it for its sins. And the land will vomit out its inhabitants. But you are to keep my statutes and ordinances. You must not commit any of these detestable things. Not the native or the foreigner who lives among you, but the men who were in the land prior to you have committed all these detestable things. And the land will become defiled. If you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it has vomited out the nations that were before you. Any person who does these detestable practices must be cut off from his people. You must keep my instructions to not do any of these detestable customs that were practiced before you, so that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am Yahweh your God. Now, the reason why I read the entire chapter, because nowhere does God makes a distinction, as our brother is doing, making a distinction, especially the ones about homosexuality. He's making a distinction there, right? That's, as I said, if God was, writing the laws with Moses, he would have took the other finger and really wrote it and then highlighted it with a laser kind of thing right here, right? So in all of these practices are equal. So now if people are doing these things, all of these practices, which we know all of these practices are being done today in our nation by various people, both Republicans and Democrats, that you can find detestable practices with the Republican. Excuse me. So in other words, God did not highlight, okay? God didn't just highlight the homosexuality. Now, abortion wasn't mentioned there, and probably because, it wasn't a thing, okay? But homosexuality was not uplifted. And hold on, I gotta close my window because they're starting to party. All right, had to, as I said, you probably couldn't hear it yet, but it was starting to get loud out there. All right, so my point here from that, by using this chapter and only picking out the verses, you misrepresent God when he said all of those practices were detestable. That all of those practices were included. So the one about adultery. So now you should be crying, you should be equally pointing out the sins of the Republicans. All right, let's continue. I wanted to make that point because, as I said, that's the problem here. When you say a biblical worldview, you're perverting the worldview. You're not highlighting adultery. You're not talking about the sins of the Republicans. Or, by the way, you're not talking about any sins. But you're going to say that the Democrats, the gays, are running things. And because of the gays, God is going to, he's pulling out his hair and he's going to flick it on America. Okay, I'm being, again, humorous. But the logic is just that silly. And also you have to realize What you're perverting is the solution wasn't a political ideology that even if you are successful in winning America back, where are the souls? Or how are souls being reached by you winning a political battle? Now let's flip it. In order for you to achieve this biblical worldview, this Christian America, people got to be Christians. So what is the solution to that? Jesus on the cross. That's why he told us to go out and be a witness to all nations. He didn't say go out and try to win all nations, but be a witness to all nations. Why? That you can save some. That if you, even if you wanted to have this grandiose ideology of saving America, you first need to save the people. We already had the laws in what was called the golden age of America. But then why did America change? You have people that were saying they really wasn't though. But you had people saying that the 30s, 40s, and 50s were the pure times, that mythical fathers knows best, Ollie and Harriet, that which again, it was a myth, just as much sin that was going on then. Just because women wore dresses and men had their hair cut close and they wore suits, that's just covering the sin, just as much sin. But you see, why did America change? And by the way, in all of that golden age, again, racism is always one of these that God doesn't care about racism. You can be as racist all the day long. That's not going to bring the wrath of God. Jim Crow was never going to bring the wrath of God. Slavery was never going to be the wrath of God. God's okay with slavery. He winked at it. Again, more hypocrisy. But if you're going to, the fantasy that you're trying to promote here has to be one with the gospel to change people's heart.
Go back to when the big hurricane Katrina hit. It was like the water hit and it forced the people out of their land. God was judging because New Orleans was filled with idolatry, with witchcraft, and with sexual perversion. People were cursing. They can go down the street and find somebody they could get a curse on by somebody, some witch that lived in a particular house. Evidently, the sin had risen so far until God had to vomit the people out of the land. And now the people that were there at that time have gone to places like Houston and other places in and around the southeast area of the.
Let's get this straight. So God, because of the gays, flooded New Orleans. Not because they never strengthened the levees. That, as with all government negligence, that when we talk about, for example, airplanes crashing, do you know that most of your commercial airplane crash, most of them were due to profit? Fly the plane, forget the maintenance, and let's fly them until they crash. People have been telling New Orleans about strengthening those, redoing those levees. They didn't. So when the perfect storm came, it flooded the city. But it also flooded godly people. Churches were destroyed. People who did not hang down into, the I don't know the section because I've never been to New Orleans, but where they have Mardi Gras, and again that's only one section of the city. Again, many churches were destroyed by the flood. So now let's go back. If you're going to compare that God was destroying New Orleans because of the gays. So in your estimation, then New Orleans had the worst gay problem than any other city. San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. In other words, Atlanta, right? Atlanta, which is being billed as one of the new gay capitals, right? So, are you saying that God said that New Orleans was worse than all those other cities, in addition to worse than all the other sins of those cities that he had to flood it, and then destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, if you go back to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis, Abraham asked the Lord, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? God had told him, I'm coming to, because of the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm going to judge them. I'm going to destroy the city. Abraham asked the Lord, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? God says no. He says, if I find 50 righteous people, will you destroy the city? God said, if I find 50 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, notice this, he said, I will spare the city. I won't even destroy the city for 50 righteous people. And he got down to 10 and he left off. But then God sent the angels to rescue Lot and his wife and his 2 daughters. His son-in-laws didn't come. But he rescued them. He brought them out of the city before he destroyed them. So he did not destroy the righteous with the wicked. And if you're pronouncing this Sodom and Gomorrah type judgment, then why didn't God bring out all the righteous people? Furthermore, there were more than 50 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. And if God would have spared the city for 50 righteous people, wouldn't even judge Sodom and Gomorrah for 50 righteous people, why didn't God spare New Orleans, as you would call it, for the more than thousands of righteous people, pastors, and Christians in New Orleans? See, when you pervert and twist scriptures, you do a disjustice to God's character. You make God look like you make him look like Trump, like a babbling fool, because he's going to destroy New Orleans, but he's not going to destroy Atlanta or San Francisco. Or Las Vegas. How could I forget Las Vegas, right? Sin City itself. So God said, okay, Las Vegas, their sin is not enough. But, by the way, Las Vegas has plenty of gay people. You see how silly the argument is?
Because the land had become defiled. This is why people got to view this thing by God's eyesight and not by your little political, racial.
Do the same, preacher, because all you're spewing is a Republican ideology, a Republican worldview. You are not teaching a biblical worldview.
Identities of just wanting to put somebody up so you can just say, I got somebody up that look like me. What do they stand for? What is the agenda? Do you know? Or are you just throwing somebody in there? Because when we vote for these things, it defiles the nation and makes it worse. Next scripture, it says, you got it? You must obey all my decrees and regulations. You must not commit any of these detestable sins. God says.
Now remember, the all that God was referring to is from verse 1 down to 28, not just the ones that pointed out the homosexuality, but all of the verses. See, so you got to deal with the adulterers. You got to deal with all of those perverted sins.
detestable. This applies both to native-born Israelites and to the foreigners living among you. Next, all these detestable activities are practiced by the people of the land where I am taking you, and this is how the land has become defiled. So do not defile the land and give it a reason to vomit you out, as it will vomit out the people who live there now. Meaning, it brings God's judgment on the nation. So that's why I'm dedicated to voting according to my convictions. And
So how is voting according to your convictions, according to the Republican platform, going to stop sin? How are they going to stop homosexuality? Right? Trump in his first term didn't stop homosexuality. In fact, he's on record of saying that he would open his building to transgender people. So how is the Republicans are going to stop all of the sins that you just read? What are the platforms that they're going to do? What did they say? Here's what we're going to do to stop homosexuality. Let's add abortion in there. What are they going to do to stop abortion? What did Trump do when he was in office the first term? And his first 2 years, he had control over both houses, which he could have enacted these gay and abortion laws. He could have said, all of his minions write up laws and pass them. He had the votes. Why didn't they do it then?
I see the world through biblical eyes. Many people think it's wrong to deal with politics in church. I want to deal with that because that has come up.
So I don't think it's an issue with dealing with politics. However, if you're going to have a biblical worldview, then look at the world through biblical eyes. So where has God told his people? Because the same command and the same teaching that you would say that God is telling you to teach would apply to anybody in any part of the world. And by the way, the gospel is being preached all over the world. And in some countries, Christians are being persecuted for their faith. So my point is that God is not telling you to preach an American ideology. That's what you're doing. It's not a biblical worldview. It's an American ideology, and it is an American Republican ideology. And how is Trump going to enforce that, strengthen that, support that? How is Trump going to do that? What policies has Trump said to you to say, "Hey, I'm going to do all these. I'm gonna govern from a biblical worldview." Has Trump promised that he's going to govern, that he's going to be a president from a biblical worldview? I'd vote for him if I can be convinced he's not a liar, the biggest liar that he is. But let's say if he honestly came out and said, "I'm going to govern from a biblical worldview," I'd vote for him. See, but really, from the Constitution standpoint, you can't, because the homosexual has every right to exist in America. Atheists have every right to exist in America. Going to get rid of the atheists?
And they say, somebody sent me something that said, when does politics have to do with Bible study or God and all that? You see, a lot of people get upset when I preach on this because many people are believing in the wrong direction and they don't want me to challenge them. So when I begin to preach truth and that truth is contrary to the way they want to vote, they get upset.
I'll challenge you. You're not teaching the Bible. You're not teaching a biblical worldview. You're teaching a political worldview. And the reason why people push back, they see the hypocrisy. Are you preaching the biblical worldview against the Republicans that are equally sinning as the Democrats? You're acting as if the Republicans don't sin.
Because they don't want to have to come in line. I want to stay over here with my family. I want to be with my friends and my people and all this kind of stuff, rather than see it from a, that's why I go back to, there's a lack of commitment to Christ. When you committed to Christ, you want to please him. You want to come in alignment with his word.
So let's look at this. You're going to say that to be in line with Christ is to be in line with the Republican Party. That's what you're preaching. This is the context of what you're talking about. So now let's talk about then, tell me how the Republican Party is upholding your worldview. What biblical principles are they practicing, teaching?
And so the reason why God ain't got a problem with it is because God is the one that established authority. God is the one that established government. And therefore, if his leaders in government do not function in the way that he tells them to function, it is going to affect the lives of his people and his kingdom. Y'all, we got to vote for something bigger than color. How am I going to live under this person? How am I going to live?
So let's examine that, because he mentioned you don't know how you're going to live under Kamala yet because she hasn't been elected. I do predict she's going to win because I think the Republicans have made such a big fool out of themselves that even some of the Republicans are not going to support Trump. That aside, let's go back to Barack Obama, because you mentioned Barack Obama, that the reason why black people voted him simply because he was black. Now, that certainly was part of it. Him being black helped him a lot. But as I told you before, there have been other black people that have ran for president that did not get the black support. So what did he do? He did like a politician, just like any other politician. He convinced you, just like Trump convinced his people. So under Barack Obama, how did your life change? Were you dragged into Sodom and Gomorrah? See, how did your life change under Obama?
What would my life be like? How are they going to affect me economically? And people don't have a hill of beans idea of knowing what policies are going to impact them. That's why I've been on this so much. And so God says only righteousness exalts a nation.
So let me stop, because I'm going to pick it up in part 7 here. But think about this. When the Republicans ruled, so let's go back to George Bush. When George Bush handed the country over to Obama, the country was we were literally on the verge, at the very edge of the cliff, ready to go over. And that's what was handed to Obama. Obama brought the nation back. And for 8 years, he had a steady upgrowth of job growth and reversing the housing crisis, so that when he handed the kingdom over to Trump, Trump had a good kingdom. I mean, not kingdom, government. Okay. Now, 4 years later, what was the condition of the nation when Trump handed it over to Biden? A pandemic that cost nearly over 700 million lives, that affected the economy. And then now Biden straightened that out. So when you say, how will our lives be? See, how will our lives be? But you're talking politics. How is any president governed? See, any president. any president. All right, we'll pick this up in part 7. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in part 7.